I'm Jolie Carter, and this is a story that might feel all too familiar, the story of a daughter who always lived in someone else's shadow. When I graduated college with honors, my parents didn't come. They flew to California to watch my younger brother play baseball. I stood on that stage, looking down at 3 empty seats, whispering to myself that one day, they'd finally see me. And years later, when I posted a picture of my brand new $230,000 Porsche 911 on Instagram, the phone rang. My mother's voice came through the speaker, sweet and cautious. "Jolie, honey, we need to talk. Family meeting tomorrow." But what they really wanted wasn't a talk. Have you ever had family who only remember you when they need something? And where are you watching this story from so I'll know how many people out there have ever felt like me? I was born and raised in Eugene, a small town in Oregon where people recognize you by the sound of your voice. The Carters, that's my family, were what you'd call the picture of middle-class America. My father, David Carter, was a civil engineer who'd worked for the same company for over 20 years. My mother, Joy, was an accountant at the local school district, a woman who cared deeply about how others perceived our family. They had 2 kids, me, Jolie the eldest, and Ryan, my younger brother by 2 years. From the moment he was born, he was the pride of the Carter family. I can still picture those weekend mornings. Dad would drive his old Ford pickup, Ryan in the passenger seat, his white baseball uniform fluttering in the breeze. Meanwhile, I stayed home mopping floors with Mom, or sitting on the porch doing science homework. Mom would tell the neighbors, "Ryan's got real athletic talent, he'll get a scholarship for sure." Then turn to me with that faint smile and say, "You just focus on working hard, okay? Don't overdo it." When I was 12, I won first place in the state science fair, a small solar energy project I'd built myself in our garage. The prize wasn't big, but to me, it meant everything. I imagined my parents showing up to the award ceremony, clapping proudly, saying, "You did great, Jolie." But that day, they were at Ryan's baseball game. All I got was a short text, "Good job, sweetie. I saw the photo." A few days later, Mom posted online celebrating Ryan's first home run, adding dozens of emojis. Her post about me? Just a single heart. At every family gathering, the conversations always revolved around Ryan. Relatives would ask, "So, which college is Ryan thinking of?" And my father would light up, launching into stories about his training camps and tournaments. Whenever I tried to mention that I'd just scored a perfect grade in math, my words would be drowned out by laughter or someone changing the subject. I learned to keep quiet. I learned to smile, even when I was invisible. My mother often told me, in that sweet but firm tone of hers, "Don't make people uncomfortable just because you're too ambitious. A girl should know her place. Being smart doesn't mean people will love you." I didn't fully understand what she meant back then, only that every time she said it, something inside me sank, like a stone pressing down on my chest. I was good at school. Really good. I was one of only 5 students to receive a full scholarship to Oregon State University. When I brought home the acceptance letter, my father simply said, "Good, at least you won't cost the family any money." And immediately added, "Can you tutor Ryan in math? He needs better grades to stay on the team." I stood there, holding the letter, my hands trembling slightly. I forced a smile so they wouldn't see how my heart had just cracked open. My mother looked at me and added, like a familiar reminder, "Don't stress too much, Jolie. It's not enough to be smart, people have to like you too." I just nodded. "Yes, Mom, I know." That summer, Ryan turned 16. My parents threw him a huge backyard birthday party complete with balloons, barbecue, and a brand new silver Honda Civic. I remember standing in the living room, watching through the window as everyone cheered. Ryan jumped up and down with joy while Dad handed him the keys. In my hand, I still held my Oregon State admission letter. No one had asked me what I wanted. No one even remembered I was there. I folded the letter carefully, tucked it into my desk drawer, and whispered to myself, "Maybe one day, they'll see me." But deep down, I already knew the truth. They had never really seen me. Only the version of me that fit their story. I arrived in Corvallis on a misty August morning. Oregon State was quieter and grander than I'd imagined, red brick buildings framed by rows of tall maple trees. For the first time in my life, I felt free. But that freedom came with an ache I couldn't ignore. Money. My father had made it clear before I left, he couldn't spend much, since Ryan needed new gear for the upcoming season. "He's got a shot at making the varsity team, so try to understand," he'd said flatly. Mom nodded in agreement, reminding me not to make things harder for the family. So I took on 2 part-time jobs, mornings at the library, evenings in the computer lab, just to afford my dorm fees and textbooks. Winter nights in Oregon could numb your fingers. I used to sit in the library, the old heater humming in the corner, typing lines of code while sipping instant coffee. The pale yellow light spilled across the keyboard, catching the cracks on my dry hands. Sometimes my phone would buzz, a message from Mom. "Come home for a visit. Ryan just got picked as team captain. We're all so proud of him." I'd stare at the glowing text in the dark, then turn the screen off. I didn't know what to say anymore. I'd spent the whole year working myself to the bone, perfect grades in algorithms, recently accepted into a research group for machine learning, and yet no one asked how I was doing, or if I was okay. I still remember the first time I met Dr. Lawson, my artificial intelligence professor. He was the kind of teacher who could read his students just by the way they asked questions. After the midterm exam, he called me aside. "Jolie," he said, "you don't just understand the technical side. You have research intuition. You should consider applying for the AI fellowship in Seattle. They're recruiting top students from nearby states." I was so stunned, I could only nod. That night, I called my mom, hoping maybe this time she'd be proud. But all she said was, "Seattle's far, honey. Don't take risks. Come home this summer. Ryan's got a big tournament, and we're all going to cheer him on." I didn't argue. I just applied. I got in. And, as I expected, no one mentioned it. That summer in Seattle was the first time I realized how much bigger the world was beyond our house in Eugene. I worked 12-hour days, learning to build AI models, learning to listen to people who didn't judge me by my gender or where I came from. One of the researchers told me once, "When a girl breaks through the walls society builds around her, she doesn't just become stronger, she becomes deeper." Those words stayed with me for years. My parents never once called to ask how the project was going. The only time they reached out was when Ryan sprained his ankle during a tournament. Mom sent me a picture of him in a hospital bed with the caption, "Pray for your brother. And send a little money if you can, I need to buy his medicine." I sent her $50, my entire food budget for the week, and went back to the lab. That was when it hit me. They didn't care what I was doing, they only cared that I was still capable of helping. Time slipped by quickly. 4 years of college blurred into endless nights, part-time jobs, and projects I carried alone. I never missed a class, never asked for an extension, never once let myself fall behind. When the graduation letter came announcing I'd be graduating with honors, I truly believed that maybe, just maybe, they'd be proud this time. I texted the family group chat. "I'll be receiving my degree this Saturday. It'd mean a lot if you could come." No one replied. 3 days later, Mom finally texted back. "Sorry, Ryan's playing in California that weekend. You understand, right?" The day of graduation was bright but cold. The campus was packed, families waving flags, holding bouquets, shouting their children's names with joy. I stood among the rows of graduates, glancing up at the bleachers at the 3 empty seats marked, "Guest of Graduate." Those seats were meant for them. When the MC called my name, I walked up to the stage, accepted my diploma from the dean, and smiled, though inside, I felt hollow. The applause echoed across the courtyard, but none of those claps belonged to the people I wanted most to hear. After the ceremony, my friends took pictures with their parents, flowers in hand, balloons bobbing in the breeze. I stood alone, my graduation gown swaying lightly in the wind. Someone asked, "Where's your family?" "They're busy," I replied, forcing a smile before turning away quickly, afraid they'd notice the tears welling in my eyes. That night, I celebrated with a cold slice of pizza in my dorm room. My graduation cap sat on the desk beside my silent phone. I scrolled through old messages from my mom, endless cheers and congratulations for Ryan, not a single one for me. I looked down at my new diploma and whispered to myself, the moment they didn't show up, I stopped waiting for them to see me. That was the day I finally understood. Their love for me was never absent, just conditional. And that condition was simple: I had to become someone they could brag about. But they forgot one thing. Sometimes, the most admirable thing about a person isn't standing on a stage. It's the quiet way they keep moving forward, even when no one's there to cheer for them. I left Corvallis right after graduation. I didn't go back to Eugene. Instead, I headed straight for Seattle, the city of glass towers and endless rain. I rented a tiny apartment in Capitol Hill, on the fourth floor of an old building with faded paint and wooden floors that creaked beneath every step. The window overlooked a narrow alley, where I could just make out the reflection of neon lights from the cafe across the street. But to me, that small space was everything, the first place that truly felt like mine. No approval needed, no audience required. I got a job as a software engineer at a startup in South Lake Union, developing customer data tracking tools. The starting pay wasn't great, but I was eager, almost naive, to prove myself. Every morning, I'd take a 45-minute bus ride, carrying my old laptop, a cup of instant coffee, and the quiet conviction that if I worked hard enough, I could change my life. While my coworkers clocked out and went home after hours, I stayed late reading documentation, testing algorithms, finding ways to make my code faster. I wasn't charming, I wasn't political, but I had something else: persistence. Every now and then, my phone would buzz again, always the same kind of message from Mom. Ryan needs to borrow some money. Can you help? He's about to buy a house with his wife. Things recording. I looked at my bank balance, only a few $100s left after rent, and replied, "I'm eating instant noodles too, Mom." She texted back, "It's fine, I just wanted to let you know. Family should always help each other." Then silence. I didn't feel angry, just empty. Maybe, in their eyes, I'd always be the one who can handle herself. And because of that, no one ever thought they needed to handle me. The long nights in Seattle blurred into a rhythm of work and study. I signed up for night coding classes at the community college and taught myself data science on weekends. I began building a small program that could automatically analyze user behavior, at first just for practice, but the deeper I went, the more I realized its potential. I called it Loom, short for illumination, because I wanted it to shed light on the patterns people overlooked. I remember those winter nights when snow blanketed the streets outside, and I sat huddled under a blanket in my freezing apartment, laptop on my knees, the blue glow of the screen, the only light in the room. I typed lines of code, shivering and smiling to myself. No one called. No one asked if I was doing okay. My college friends were busy with their new lives. My parents were consumed by pride for Ryan, the son who was now becoming a sports entrepreneur after opening a small athletic gear store. I knew about it because Mom posted on Facebook with the caption, "So proud of our son." Time moved on, and I slowly became invisible. I stopped posting on social media. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving, just sent a short email. "I'm doing fine." The replies, if they came at all, arrived days later. "Good, Ryan just won another award. We're all so happy." I stopped expecting recognition. Instead, I poured everything into Loom, the one thing that reminded me I still existed. After 3 years, I'd grown confident enough to quit my job and go out on my own. I founded Loom Tech, a company of one, tucked away in a corner of an old co-working space downtown. I wrote code by day, sent funding pitches by night, survived on cheap sandwiches, and worked until the light outside shifted from blue to gold. Sometimes I was so exhausted I'd fall asleep right on the keyboard, waking up with key marks pressed into my cheek. But I never stopped. Because deep down, I knew if I didn't build something meaningful, no one else would ever believe I could. 4 years passed like that, quietly, unseen, without anyone noticing. Mom only called when she needed money for Ryan. The last time I picked up, she said, "Your brother's getting married." They need a little help, could you send something? I asked. Where's the wedding? She replied, casually, as if it were nothing. At home. This weekend. You're probably too busy to come. I smiled. Yes, Mom. I'm busy. Busy enough that I never even got an invitation. On the day of the wedding, I saw the photos online: Dad in a tailored suit, Mom beaming, Ryan holding his bride's hand under the garden lights. I scrolled through them slowly. No anger, no sadness. Just silence. Then I printed a small card and wrote a few words. Wishing you happiness. And I mailed it. No one ever replied. That night, I stood by my apartment window, watching the city lights flicker across the rain-streaked glass. Seattle rain tapped softly on the roof, like a steady metronome. I thought about that wedding hundreds of miles away, my family laughing, toasting, telling stories that didn't include me. And in that moment, I saw it clearly: I didn't belong there anymore. No one asked how I was doing. But for the first time, that didn't break me. It strengthened me. I realized that if I wanted to be seen, I'd have to turn on the light myself. I left Seattle soon after, when Loom, the small tool I had once built in that cramped apartment, started gaining attention. Two of my former classmates, Alex and Priya, reached out after reading a technical post I'd shared on a programming forum. We met at a coffee shop near the pier, a sticky wooden table, half-empty cups, the gray Seattle morning light reflecting through a fogged-up window. Alex was a product guy, fast-talking, full of energy. Priya handled finance, sharp, grounded, almost intimidating. And me? I had the idea. More importantly, I had something they didn't: a working prototype. When they suggested I move to Austin to build the company together, I hesitated. I'd never left the Pacific Northwest, never imagined starting from zero in a city that felt like another planet. But then I thought, in Seattle, I'd learned how to survive. Maybe in Austin, I could learn how to live. So I packed my things and rented a small apartment in South Congress, where music from nearby bars drifted through the windows at night, and the Texas sunlight spilled through thin white curtains each morning. I named the company LoomTech, keeping a piece of my past, a quiet reminder of how far I'd come. The three of us started out in a rented office inside an old warehouse district, just 3 desks, 1 coffee machine, and a whiteboard crowded with tangled lines of code. I was technically the CEO, though in reality, none of us had titles. Work piled up endlessly, swallowing our lives whole. I often stayed up until 3 in the morning debugging, rewriting algorithms, or simply sitting alone in the quiet, thinking about what came next. There were nights when the power went out, and we worked by the light of our phones. Mornings, when I'd look out at the rain-soaked parking lot and see a reflection of my younger self, the girl who once ran to her first interview because her car had broken down. We lived on coffee and hope. Priya used to joke that a startup was a religion where people pray for funding, and I'd reply, if we fail, at least we tried. The first month, no one bought our product. The second, we burned through nearly all our savings. But by the 6th month, a real estate company in Dallas reached out. They wanted to use our software to analyze satellite images of land plots. That was our first contract. And from there, LoomTech began to grow. 3 years later, our office wasn't a warehouse anymore. It was the 12th floor of a glass building overlooking the Colorado River. I was still the first to arrive and the last to leave. One night, after everyone had gone home, I stood in the middle of the office, watching the city lights reflect off the LoomTech logo on the wall. The hum of printers, the soft tapping of keyboards, the echoes of laughter, they all blended into one quiet symphony of persistence. I thought back to the day I'd signed our first lease, my hand trembling so hard my signature came out crooked. Now, I was signing another contract, one 1,000 times larger. A venture fund from California had offered to acquire LoomTech for $12 million. After 3 intense weeks of negotiation, it was done. My share after taxes. $6 million. Alex grinned and said, "We should celebrate champagne, maybe even a weekend trip." But I just wanted to sleep. I didn't post it online. I didn't brag. I sent one short email to the team. Thank you for believing when no one else did. Then I shut down my computer and sat there for a while, letting the silence settle. For the first time in years, I felt both happiness and a strange emptiness. There was no one to tell. No one to ask, "You really did it?" I called my mom, just to hear her voice. She answered after 3 rings, speaking quickly. "Ryan just opened another branch for his sports store, we're so busy. How are you?" "I'm good," I said. Then hung up. A few months later, I did something even I hadn't expected. I bought a car. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted something tangible. A reminder of how far I'd come. I chose a red Porsche 911 Carrera GTS, the same one I used to stare at through the showroom window in Seattle when I couldn't even afford a monthly bus pass. When the salesman asked, "Would you like a personalized plate?" I smiled and said, "No. I don't need anyone to know." The night I picked up the car, I drove it across the Congress Avenue Bridge. Austin shimmered beneath golden lights that rippled across the still water. I rolled down the window, the wind rushing against my face, the faint scent of gasoline mixing with the warm night air. I turned on the radio, Home by Edward Sharpe began to play, and for the first time, I felt truly free. No more memories of empty seats at my graduation. No more of my mother's voice comparing me to Ryan. Just the steady hum of the engine behind me, a quiet declaration that I had made it, all on my own. That car wasn't about showing off. It was a symbol. A reminder that I had once driven a beat-up sedan to a job interview in the freezing rain, shoes soaked, still smiling as I walked through the door. Now, I didn't need anyone to open doors for me. I could open them myself. I could drive myself wherever I wanted to go. I was never the type to post on social media, especially after realizing that everything I shared only gave my family new ways to compare me to my brother. But that night, after parking in front of my apartment in Austin, I looked at the gleaming red car under the streetlight and took a picture. It wasn't a flashy shot, just a quiet angle of the Porsche 911 under the fading sunset. My caption was simple. "Finally, something that drives like my ambition." No tags. No hashtags. I didn't expect anyone to care. I just wanted to remember that moment, the moment I'd finally outgrown the limits they had set for me. I turned off my phone, made myself a cup of tea, and thought that would be the end of it. But I was wrong. About 12 hours later, as I sat in a conference room finalizing the last papers for Loomtech's acquisition, my phone began buzzing nonstop. The caller ID lit up, Mom. My heart skipped a beat. 3 years. She hadn't called in 3 years. Our only contact had been a few scattered texts. "Merry Christmas. Your brother opened another branch. Did you congratulate him?" I stared at the screen flashing in my hand before finally answering. Her voice sounded the same, soft, but with a nervous edge. "Jolie, how are you? Your father says we need to meet. There's a family matter we need to discuss." I stayed silent for a few seconds. The word family hit me sharp and foreign. "Family?" I repeated slowly. "I thought you'd forgotten I existed." She let out an awkward laugh, a short breath catching between her words. "Don't say that. Ryan's been having some difficulties. You know how business can be these days. Your father and I think we should all sit down and talk it through. We're meeting at the house tomorrow afternoon, okay?" I stared at the contract on the table, the bold line that read, "Total acquisition value, $12 million. My hand tightened around the pen. Not a single word of congratulations. Not even a, "We're proud of you." Just their voices again when they needed something. I asked quietly, "Did you know yesterday was my birthday?" Silence. A long pause, more than 10 seconds, long enough for me to hear the TV in the background, Ryan's laughter, the clinking of glasses. Finally, Mom said, "Oh, was it? Sorry, things have been so busy lately. But what matters is, we're still a family, right?" Family. That word again, but this time, it carried no weight. I closed my eyes, hearing the practiced softness in her tone, the voice of someone who'd long mastered the art of emotional negotiation. "I'll come," I said evenly. After hanging up, I sat in silence. The evening breeze slipped through the curtains, cool against my skin, but inside, everything churned. I opened Instagram. The photo of my red car had already passed 1,000 likes, mostly from colleagues and old friends, people who'd seen me struggle through the gray winters of Seattle. Among the hundreds of congratulatory comments, one name caught my eye: Joy Carter. My mother. Her comment was simple, just a single clap emoji and the words, "Proud of you." I stared at it for a long time. I couldn't tell if it came from pride or calculation. That night, I didn't sleep. I made coffee and sat before my glowing laptop, scrolling through old lines of Loom Tech code. Every line was a memory, each one from nights when I'd worked until dawn, debugging, rewriting, refusing to give up. No one had been there with me. No words of encouragement. Not even a, "You've got this." I'd done it all alone. And now, they wanted a family meeting? To discuss Ryan's difficulties? I knew exactly how it would go. Ryan, the golden boy of the Carter family, had finally stumbled. And now they needed someone to fix it. Mom would speak in her gentle, persuasive tone. Dad would appeal to morality. Family helps family. Ryan would bow his head, play the humbled son, and then return to his pedestal once the crisis passed. They hadn't remembered my graduation. They hadn't come to my awards ceremony. They hadn't called when I was sick. They hadn't wished me happy birthday in 3 years. The only thing they ever remembered was my bank account. But this time, it would be different. I would go not to save them. To end it. I opened the drawer and took out a freshly printed business card. Jolie Carter, CEO, founder, Loom Tech Inc. Under the warm desk light, the embossed letters shimmered softly. I placed it beside the Porsche keys and took a deep breath. Tomorrow, I would drive that same road back to Eugene, the road I'd left behind 10 years ago, in silence. But this time, I wouldn't be the daughter seeking approval. I'd be the woman returning to deliver her final words. The road from Austin back to Eugene felt longer than I remembered. A light Oregon rain tapped against the windshield, each drop trailing down like someone trying to wash away the past. I drove the Porsche 911 up the I-5, the low hum of the engine filling the cabin, strong, steady, and alone, just like me. 10 years ago, I'd left this place in a beat-up car that barely ran, my parents waving half-heartedly from the porch as I disappeared down the street. This time, I was returning not to be welcomed, but to end something that had never truly been spoken aloud. As I turned onto the familiar street, their house came into view, the same beige 2-story with the white wooden fence, the flower bed Mom had planted out front. But where it once gave me warmth, now it only felt cold. I parked at the curb. The living room curtain shifted, and through the glass, I caught my father's eyes. Not surprise. Not emotion. Calculation. He stepped outside, arms crossed. "New car?" he asked flatly. "How much did that set you back?" I smiled, calm and steady. "Enough to make you call me, apparently." His jaw tightened just for a second. Then he turned back toward the house, motioning me inside. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen. Mom was stirring a cup as if everything were normal. At the table sat Ryan and his wife, Sophie, her eyes flickered between guilt and defensiveness. No one asked how I'd been. No one said, "Welcome home." Just the sound of chairs creaking and an air thick enough to choke on. Dad sat at the head of the table, his tone dropping into the cadence of a business meeting. "Ryan's run into some financial trouble. The store expanded too quickly and cash flow's tight. We were hoping you could lend a hand, just a temporary loan, a few months, tops. Once things settle, he'll pay you back in full." I said nothing. The clock on the wall ticked, each second sharp as a pin. Mom looked at me, forcing a soft smile. "Family takes care of each other, Jolie. Ryan's under a lot of stress." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table, my voice steady. "And my graduation, do you remember that?" The room froze. Ryan looked up, frowning, as if he couldn't see the connection. Mom set her cup down. The clink of porcelain against wood echoed faintly. Dad's brows knitted together. "Why bring up old things?" he said. I looked at each of them one by one and spoke slowly, my voice steady but sharp. I stood on that stage holding a diploma you once called meaningless. 3 empty seats sat in the guest section. I can still see them every time I close my eyes. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The ceremony ended and no one came. But I still waited. I told myself maybe you were stuck in traffic or missed your flight. But now I know you were just busy watching Ryan play baseball in California. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint whistle of wind slipping through the crack in the window. Sophie lowered her eyes, maybe out of embarrassment. Ryan sighed and scratched his head. "Come on, that was ages ago," he muttered. Mom cut in, her tone edged with irritation. "Jolie, don't be childish. You can't cling to old things forever. We're talking about the present, about something that actually needs fixing." I turned to her, still smiling, but my eyes had gone cold. "The present, Mom, is what you built action by action, year after year. I didn't come here to talk about money. I came to talk about boundaries." Dad frowned, leaning back in his chair. "Boundaries? You're making this sound so dramatic. We're just asking for a little help, not a handout." I shook my head. "No, Dad. This isn't help. This is the same cycle our family has always lived in. Ryan makes a mistake, and I fix it. You stay silent when I'm forgotten, but suddenly you're loud when I succeed. I get it now. I don't owe anyone anything anymore." I walked toward the window, looking out at the flower bed Mom used to make me weed every morning. The smell of damp earth rose up, bringing back every memory afternoon spent studying while Dad drove Ryan to practice. The countless times I handed over perfect report cards just to get a distracted nod in return. I turned back to face them, my voice calmer now but clear, cutting through the air like glass. "I've spent my entire life trying to be seen, but now, I don't need to be." Mom opened her mouth to say something, but I raised a hand. "Don't. I've heard enough. We both know this so-called family meeting is just code for 'Can Jolie bail Ryan out again?' I didn't come here to write a check, I came to write the ending." No one answered. Ryan's face flushed red, and Dad stared at me, a mix of anger and disbelief flickering in his eyes. I set my car keys on the table and said quietly, "If you really want to talk, then let's talk about boundaries, because from now on I'm going to have them." "Vo." Dad shot up, slamming his hand on the table, his voice like metal clanging against concrete. "Family means helping each other, Jolie. Have you forgotten that?" He didn't look at me like a father speaking to his daughter. He looked at me like a boss disappointed in an employee who refused to obey. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "Helping each other, yes. But helping doesn't mean one person carries everyone else forever." Ryan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a half-sarcastic, half-irritated smirk on his face. "You've got money now, don't you? Why are you being so stingy? You wouldn't even have that degree if this family hadn't supported you." I turned to him, meeting his eyes squarely. "Supported me?" I repeated softly but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do you remember when I was a sophomore, working late nights in the library because Dad said you needed money for your team? Do you know I lived in a moldy apartment with a leaking roof, eating expired bread for 3 days straight because I couldn't afford groceries while the rest of you were in Hawaii, smiling for family photos with the caption, 'Family is everything'? And now you call me stingy?" Ryan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I continued, my voice calm but unflinching. "You're right, Ryan, I did make money, but I didn't earn it so I could keep feeding the habits that once broke me. I'm not stingy. I've just stopped hurting myself for people who never noticed the bleeding." The air in the room thickened until it felt hard to breathe. Mom sat frozen for a moment, then suddenly began to cry, her shoulders trembling, the sound small, practiced, and perfectly timed. "Jolie, how can you say that?" she whimpered. "I just wanted us to be together again. It's been so long since the family sat down like this." I looked at her, but the old tenderness I once felt was long gone. "You don't want reunion, Mom," I said quietly. "You want control. For as long as I can remember, every time I did something you didn't plan, you called it rebellion. When I succeeded, you called it luck. And when you needed something from me, suddenly it became family duty. I met her eyes. Real reunion doesn't start with a request for money. Her tears stopped. She glanced toward my father, hoping he'd take over. He sighed, long and heavy. We don't want to argue, he said at last. But you're letting money change you, Jolie. You're not the same anymore. I smiled, faint but certain. You're right, I have changed. But not because of money, because I finally learned how to set boundaries. You call that selfishness, I call it healing. Oh, bet. I reached into my bag, pulled out a thick folder, and placed it on the wooden table. The soft thud broke the silence. I actually came here to make an announcement, I said evenly. Dad frowned at the folder. What is this, a contract? Something like that, I replied. It's the official registration papers for the Loom Foundation, a nonprofit I just established. The starting fund is $2 million from the shares I sold when Loom Tech was acquired. Ryan let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. So what, you've got millions, and instead of helping your own family, you're giving it away to strangers. I nodded. Yes, because they deserve it more. I opened the folder, flipped to the first page, and read aloud, my tone steady, unwavering. This foundation will provide scholarships for young women pursuing technology, especially those who've been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed, just like I once was. It's for the girls no one believed in, the ones with no safety net, who still keep fighting forward. I want them to have the chance I never had. Mom's sobs grew louder now, raw and real this time. $2 million? For strangers? She cried. While your brother is drowning in debt, while this family's business is falling apart, Jolie, how could you? I looked at her, my mother, with a gaze that was cold but strangely calm. Mom, you're mistaken, I said softly. It's not that I can't bear to help, it's that I can't keep being this family's emergency wallet anymore. I've worked for 10 years of building something from nothing, and now, I want the money I've earned to open doors for others, not to patch the same holes this family keeps tearing open. My father slammed his palm on the table, his face turning red. Jolie, you're embarrassing the entire family. I rose slowly, meeting his glare with a quiet steadiness. No, Dad. I'm just telling the truth. The shame doesn't come from me refusing to give money, it comes from the fact that you only remember I exist when I have money. The room went silent. Only the rhythmic tick of the wall clock filled the air. Ryan stared at the floor, his lips pressed tight. Mom's hands trembled, fingers twisting together. Dad stood there, jaw clenched, eyes darting between anger and disbelief. I closed the folder, slipped it back into my bag, and said evenly, I didn't come here to divide money, I came to draw boundaries. And I think I've done that. I turned toward the door. Behind me, Mom's voice wavered, thin and trembling. You'll regret this, Jolie. Blood ties don't just disappear. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. For a moment, I considered walking out, letting the story end like all the others, in silence, in misunderstanding, with me branded the ungrateful daughter. But not this time. I turned back. They were still sitting there, Mom's eyes darting, Dad's expression tight with confusion and fear. Ryan's face flushed red as he clenched his fists. I knew that if I left now, they'd rewrite this moment, twisted into another tale of how I'd changed. But tonight, I would tell my own ending. I walked back to the table, opened my bag again, and pulled out a thick black leather folder. The soft click of the clasp echoed in the quiet room. Both my parents looked up, startled. Before I go, I said, my voice calm but unmistakably firm. I have one more thing to announce. A surprise just like you wanted. Dad narrowed his eyes. What now? I took out the top document. The logo of Cascade First Credit Union gleamed in the corner. Below it, the words, Property Title Transfer, confirmed. I placed the document in the center of the table and turned it toward them. I just bought a small commercial property downtown, I said slowly, every word deliberate. The same one you used as collateral when you mortgaged this house to fund Ryan's store. The bank was preparing to foreclose, but not anymore. My father froze. Mom's hands shook as she flipped to the next page. There, printed clearly beneath the official seal, was the new registered owner's name. Jolie Carter. No one spoke. Not for several seconds. Only the clock ticked on, sharp, rhythmic, and merciless, as if mocking the silence that had finally fallen over the Carter family. I took a deep breath and continued, my voice calm but unwavering. I didn't buy it to take anything away from you, and I didn't buy it to brag. I bought it because if I hadn't, the bank would have taken this house, the place that, despite everything, still holds the memories of my childhood. I've paid off the entire mortgage. Law. I paused, looking directly at both of them. But the title now carries my name. My father shot to his feet, his face flushed red. So this is how you humiliate us? He barked. I answered immediately, my tone steady enough to make even my mother stop breathing for a second. No, Dad. I did it to end things, to end the cycle of debt, control, and silence. You're not losing your home, and I'm not throwing anyone out. But from now on, if you choose to stay here, you'll live responsibly. No more careless loans. No more blame, no more using family as leverage for rescue. I don't want anyone in this family to owe me anything except for one thing. His voice was a low growl. And what's that supposed to be? I met his eyes, calm as ever. The truth, I said. From now on, the only thing we owe each other is the truth, not money. The room went completely still. Outside, the wind whistled through the porch railing, sounding almost like the house itself exhaling after years of holding its breath. Ryan slammed his hand against the table, his chair toppled backward with a sharp crash. I don't need your pity, he shouted. You bought the house, congratulations. Guess you're the perfect outsider now. Then he stormed out, the door slamming so hard that Mom's coffee spilled across the table. I didn't look after him. Instead, I reached into my bag again and pulled out another set of papers, thinner this time, printed on heavy cream stock. I placed it beside the property documents and turned it so they could read the title clearly. The Caldwell Scholarship Fund. Mom's brows knitted together. Her voice trembled. What is that now? I smiled softly, but with a depth that stilled the air. It's the second announcement I came to make today. I sat back down, gently running my fingertips over the edge of the document, as if touching something sacred. The Caldwell Scholarship Fund is a $1 million scholarship program I've just established. It's for young women in Oregon pursuing degrees in STEM. I named it after my high school teacher, Miss Caldwell, the first person who ever told me, Jolie, you don't need anyone's permission to be brilliant. Mom's mouth fell open, no sound came out. Dad stared at me, his eyes flickering between astonishment and indignation. $1 million? He said. You're giving that to strangers while your brother. I cut him off, my words clear, deliberate. While my brother had an entire childhood of being celebrated. While he had parents who stood by him through every failure, who let him fall safely because there was always someone to catch him. While I had to learn to stand up on my own, from neglect. End of tap. I leaned forward, meeting both their eyes. Yes, I gave that money away. Because someone once saw me when no one else would. And now, I intend to do the same for every girl who's still waiting to be seen. I paused and looked at my mother. Her eyes shimmered, but not with emotion, rather with the realization that her old tears no longer worked. Do you know why I named the foundation after Miss Caldwell and not after our family? I asked softly. Because she taught me something you never could: how to see the value in others without trying to own it. My father opened his mouth to speak, but I continued before he could interrupt. You once told me that family is everything, but I've learned something else. If love in a family only exists when I'm useful, then it isn't love, it's a transaction. And I'm done making transactions. The room felt frozen. My mother sank back into her chair, her hands trembling. You really have changed, Jolie, she whispered. I nodded. I hope so, because if I hadn't, I'd still be sitting here begging you to see me just like I did 10 years ago. I gathered the two folders, slipped them neatly into my bag, and said quietly, "This house still belongs to you. The only difference is that now it stands on something real, not hidden debt. I've cleared it all with the bank. You don't need to thank me." Consider it my way of closing the final chapter in our old story. Ascertain. I walked toward the door and paused at the edge of the porch. The sky over Eugene was gray, but in the distance, a thin beam of sunlight fell across the neighbor's roof. I spoke without turning back. "You used to tell me not to make people uncomfortable by being too ambitious. Now I understand ambition isn't a sin. It only scares those who survive by keeping others small." No one replied. I walked to my car, opened the door. In the rearview mirror, I saw my mother collapse into her chair, my father standing motionless by the window, and the old house now bearing my name rising quietly behind them, a contradiction in itself. The place that once made me feel small had become proof of my freedom. I started the engine. The Porsche rumbled softly, not loud, but certain. As the tires rolled over the street blanketed in golden leaves, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. Not because I'd won, but because, for the first time, I no longer had anything to prove. I had, as the caption once said, showed up with a surprise. A gift not for them, but for myself. The right to choose my own life. And the right to walk away when family no longer means love. The next day, I left Eugene and drove back to Austin in silence. Along the highway, my phone kept buzzing, but this time, I didn't reach for it. I already knew what those messages would say. The first one came the next morning from Mom. "You destroyed this family." I stared at the glowing words on the screen, then turned the phone face down. I wasn't angry, I wasn't even sad. Maybe, in her world, setting boundaries will always look like betrayal. A few hours later, Dad posted something on Facebook, a short status that quickly gathered dozens of shares from relatives and old family friends. When children succeed, they forget where they came from. 1. The post was paired with a photo of him standing on the porch, arms crossed, wearing a forced smile and the kind of self-pity that always drew sympathy. The comments were predictable. "Kids these days are so selfish. Family should matter more than money. Hopefully she'll realize before it's too late." I read a few lines, then set my phone down on the table. A few years ago, that would have broken me. I would have cried, tried to explain myself, maybe even written a long message defending how I wasn't ungrateful. But now I just felt light. Because I finally understood when someone wants to play the victim, they'll always find a stage. And yet, a few days later, something unexpected happened. A small article appeared in the Eugene Herald's local news section. Oregon engineer establishes $1 million scholarship fund for women in STEM. I was once overlooked, and I don't want anyone else to be. A photo of me holding the plaque for the Caldwell Scholarship Fund spread across local news outlets. Within 24 hours, the same people who had condemned me on my father's post began writing new comments. "This is incredible. Her parents must be proud. How? She's doing what most people only talk about." Meanwhile, my parents' accounts went completely silent. The old post disappeared, no apology, no clarification. I knew the article hadn't come from them. It came from a journalist who had interviewed me briefly at the fund's launch event. I hadn't asked her to write anything, but maybe my silence had spoken louder than anything I could have said. For the first time, they were forced to see me not through their own narrative, but through the world's eyes. A week later, I heard through an acquaintance in Eugene that Ryan had officially declared bankruptcy. His sports store had closed down, his second house repossessed by the bank. People said he'd moved back in with my parents, and that the house was once again filled with tension. I said nothing. I didn't comment, didn't share, didn't gloat. I wasn't seeking revenge. I just chose silence. Because sometimes, silence is the loudest sound there is. Sometimes, my mother still sent short messages, reaching out in the same old ways. "Our family is going through a tough time." Or, "Can you give me some financial advice?" I read them, but I didn't reply. Not out of anger, but because I refused to return to that old role, the emotional caretaker of a family that never once asked what I needed. Then one afternoon, while I was working at the new office of the Loom Foundation in Austin, an old beige envelope was delivered by hand, no stamp, no sender. On the front, in the familiar, slightly slanted handwriting, were two simple words. Jolie. I recognized it immediately, the gentle rightward tilt, the faint tremble in every M. Mom. I opened it and read slowly, line by line. Jolie. We were wrong. Not because we didn't help you, but because we didn't understand that you needed love more than independence. We thought letting you stand on your own was the same as loving you. But in truth, we used silence to justify neglect. When I read about your scholarship fund, I felt both proud and ashamed. I don't ask for forgiveness. I only hope that one day you'll understand that we never hated you, we just didn't know how to love you the right way. And when I finished reading, I sat still for a long time. The letter was short, plain, even, but unlike every justification I had ever heard from them before. For the first time, there was no family is everything, no request, no blame. Just a quiet, overdue admission. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer right beside the old wedding card I'd once mailed to Ryan that said, "Wishing you happiness." Then, two pieces of paper, one from a forgotten past, the other from a present filled with awareness, lying side by side like two opposite chapters of the same story. I didn't write back. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that silence can be the only way to preserve the truth of a memory. A reply would turn it into a negotiation. And I was done negotiating. Outside, the Texas sunlight slanted through the glass, spreading a warm glow across my desk. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and went back to work. Inside me, there was no anger left. No need to win. Only a quiet peace, the peace of someone who no longer needs to be seen because she finally knows she shines on her own. That summer in Austin was radiant, so bright it felt as if it could wash away every shadow of the past. I stood in the downtown convention hall, where the Loom Foundation was hosting its first ever scholarship ceremony. Over 100 people were there, students, teachers, sponsors, and in the front row, I saw Mrs. Caldwell. Her hair was grayer now, but her eyes still carried that same warmth, the same way she'd looked at me when I was 16 and said, "Jolie, you don't need anyone's permission to be brilliant." When the host announced the foundation's name, I stepped onto the stage. My voice echoed through the microphone, but my heart was soft, calm. After a brief speech, I handed the mic to one of this year's recipients, a 17-year-old girl named Lena, wearing a simple dress and worn-out sneakers. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "I want to become someone like you, someone who doesn't need permission to shine." The hall went completely silent for a moment. I looked at her, then smiled. A real smile. Unforced. Unafraid. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly light. Maybe that was the moment I finally stopped looking back. After the ceremony, Mrs. Caldwell walked up to me and pulled me into a long, warm embrace. "I'm proud of you, Jolie," she whispered. "But more than that, I'm glad you no longer need anyone else to be proud for you." I smiled and nodded. "Thank you for seeing me before I ever saw myself." In the months that followed, I poured myself into the foundation, launching mentorship programs, connecting young women with tech companies, creating spaces where they could grow without apology. Every morning, I woke up early, made coffee, opened the window, and let the sunlight spill across my desk. Everything looked the same, but my mind was different. I no longer thought of Eugene with anger, only with a strange, quiet peace. During my final therapy session, my counselor asked, "Jolie, when you look back now, how do you feel?" I thought for a while, then said, "I don't hate them anymore. I've just stopped looking for them." She smiled gently, jotting down a note before saying a line I would never forget. "Forgiveness doesn't mean going back, it just means knowing when to let go." That night, I opened my laptop and wrote a short email to my mother. "I hope you and Dad are well. But I won't be coming back. I'm living the life I chose, and for the first time, it feels like enough. I read it 3 times before pressing send. No tears. No hesitation. Just the quiet relief of setting down a suitcase I had carried for far too long. I stepped out onto the balcony, watching the Austin lights shimmer on the lake, listening to the faint hum of traffic in the distance. And in that still moment, I knew I was finally free. A year later, the afternoon sun poured over Austin like liquid gold. I was driving my red Porsche 911 along the lakeside road, the wind threading through my hair, the scent of wildflowers drifting into the car. Beside me sat Owen, my new co-founder at the foundation, and the person who'd quietly walked beside me through all of it. He laughed as I rounded a curve a little too fast. You still drive the same way you did the first day I met you in that conference room, fast, precise, and never looking back. I grinned. Old habits die hard. Oh, Ken. We pulled over by the water, where the setting sun stretched its reflection across the lake. Owen turned to me, his voice soft but sincere. If you could go back to that graduation, would you invite them? I looked out at the birds gliding over the glowing water and said, no need. I can hold my own graduation anytime, every time I overcome something that used to hurt. He nodded quietly. We sat there in silence, listening to the wind, the gentle ripples of the lake, and that familiar voice within the sound of peace I once thought I'd never know. Later that evening, I drove to the East Austin Community Center, where a new sign gleamed under the fading light. The Caldwell STEM Lab, donated by Jolie Carter. I stopped the car and stood still in front of the building. Through the glass windows, I could see children inside, their faces glowing in the light of computer screens as they typed their very first lines of code. A little girl with curly hair looked up, caught my gaze through the window, and smiled, then waved. The sunlight reflected off the glass, and for a brief moment, my reflection overlapped with hers, a calmer, fuller version of myself. I walked in, greeted the staff, and toured the classroom. Rows of computers lined up neatly, posters of women in science covering the walls: Ada Lovelace, Katherine Johnson, Grace Hopper. I saw my own silhouette among them, not because of genius, but because of one shared truth. Every one of us had once been underestimated, and yet none of us disappeared. When the children's class ended, I sat on a bench outside, watching the sun dip slowly behind the distant buildings. My mind drifted back through every chapter. The damp apartment in Seattle, the empty graduation seats in Eugene, the red car rolling down the highway home. Each stop had been a lesson, and the final one was this: you don't need anyone else to confirm your worth. I took out my phone and opened the last message my mother ever sent me. We just didn't know how to love you the right way. I didn't delete it. I kept it not as a memory, but as a reminder that love, when misunderstood, can wound as deeply as neglect. But now, I finally knew how to love myself the right way. I glanced over at Owen, who was taking photos of the kids as they laughed and packed their backpacks. He looked at me and asked, "How do you feel?" I smiled softly. "Like I'm looking at a smaller version of myself," I said, "except this time. She's not alone. She has someone standing behind her." The sky turned violet. I stood up, taking one last look at the building. The words Caldwell STEM Lab gleamed against the sunset, shining like a beacon for the next generation. I thought of my parents, no anger, no longing. Just a quiet whisper inside. Thank you for not showing up to that graduation. Because if you had, I might never have learned how to stand on my own. I walked back to the car and started the engine. The Porsche hummed to life, low, steady, warm, blending into the rhythm of the city, easing into night. I drove through streets bathed in light, across the Congress Bridge, the wind swirling around me like a song I finally knew by heart. And somewhere inside, a voice rose, not to end the story, but to close it gently, like the final note of a long song. They missed my graduation once. But that absence taught me the most important truth of all: no one can ever miss me again, because I'm the one who sees myself first.